Black Myth Wukong is for many people the first AAA action gaming experience rooted deeply in real-life Chinese mythology, centered around one of history's most famous mythological characters, the Monkey King, also known as Sun Wukong, among other names. And let me be the first to say that this game, from its fighting mechanics to its beautiful graphics and animations, to its breathtaking musical score, to its stories woven expertly into the gameplay, is equal parts an incredible experience and a love letter to ancient Chinese mythology. And I also wanted to issue a huge thank you right off the bat to Hero Games for gifting me the fantastic Black Myth Wukong. Now with that out of the way, if you've been playing the game or have been curiously watching some of the cutscenes of the game or boss fights and your face ends up looking like this a lot, don't worry, you're definitely not alone. The story and characters, though incredible and very well presented, are also, like I mentioned, deeply rooted in Buddhist mythology, with many of the characters and stories specifically rooted in the 16th century novel called Journey to the West, written by Wu Cheng'en, which means that the game is completely littered with characters and themes and references to the novel, which, quite frankly, if you don't know, then you don't know. However, if you're watching this video and hearing my voice right now, you're in luck, because after many hours combing through the novel and Buddhism and talking it out with my good buddy Rand the Lon historian in my Discord server, it is my honor to present to you an explanation of the lore behind every boss in the game in a way that is easy for everyone to understand. And I can assure you, the lore is very good and very interesting, and I've enjoyed piecing all of the amazing stories together quite a bit. However, as I'm sure you might have guessed, there are quite a few of these bosses in the game. In order to actually produce videos about them relatively efficiently, I've decided to release them by chapter, starting with chapter 1. And by the way, if you want more Wukong lore explained, please feel free to leave comments or likes on this video, and depending on the turnout, that will determine how much of this game I cover in addition to the bosses. But anyway, without further ado, please sit back, relax, subscribe if you haven't already, and enjoy the story of Black Myth Wukong. Let's briefly summarize the setup of the game so that everyone's on the same page. As many of you probably know by now, the game starts off with the player taking control of the mythical Sun Wukong himself, facing a vast heavenly host that's composed of thousands of soldiers, enormous giants, a pretty man with a third eye, and even a dog. But after this cool yet brief scene, the game straight up kills Wukong off before even the title screen shows up. As a side note, we know this scene takes place after the events of the novel Journey to the West due to several little details sprinkled here and there, such as the aforementioned pretty man known as Erlang Shen referring to Wukong as the victorious fighting Buddha, which is a title Wukong did not receive until the end of the novel, after the conclusion of the fabled journey. We're then given some exposition about Wukong's essence being split into 6 relics representing the 6 senses that make up a living being in Buddhism, which are also represented by physical organs: eyes with sight, ears with sound, nose with smell, tongue with taste, body with touch, and mind with awareness or other mental objects. It's at this point that you take control of the actual character you'll be playing throughout the story, an unnamed yet strangely familiar looking monkey known only as the Destined One, with your entire goal being to set off and retrieve these 6 relics or 6 essences of Sun Wukong, which also divides the entire experience of the game into 6 chapters, each of which has a final boss to defeat in order to retrieve said relic. The first chapter, which is the chapter that we'll be focusing on in this video, is called Black Cloud, Red Fire, and takes place on the Black Wind Mountain and deals with the first relic, the Craving Eyes, guided by the fearsome Black Wind King. By the way, most of the bosses of each chapter have stories and lore that are typically pretty interconnected with one another, which is a sign of some amazing writing if you ask me, but because of this, I'll be explaining the story of the Black Wind King, whose true name is Haifeng Guai, alongside the other main bosses. But first, let's talk about the minor bosses that aren't quite as connected to one another. The first of these minor bosses, as well as the first boss in the entire game, would be the Bull Guard, a powerful Yao Guai. And while we're on the topic, I feel like we do need to cover what exactly a Yao Guai is, in case you didn't know, especially as opposed to the Western idea of what a demon is, which is typically what they end up being translated to in English, although this comparison isn't entirely accurate. When Europeans or other Western civilizations think of a demon, it's assumed that it is a supernatural being, but typically there's also an attached moral implication along with said being. And by moral implication, I mean evil. Satan and his demons are considered evil in Christianity, and demons are typically shown in media as opposing what is good or morally upright, and oftentimes want to cause harm to the good people of our planet Earth. They're also typically associated with a higher power that they follow, such as Satan or another devil figure. A Yao Guai, on the other hand, is in fact a similar supernatural deity like a demon, which may or may not look humanoid, but is only sometimes depicted as being immoral. They definitely don't have to be. Many Yao Guais are amoral, or rather just neutral, and worry about their own interests, regardless of any higher power, while still being a supernatural entity that possesses supernatural abilities. In fact, they're often depicted as being able to experience the full range of human emotions right alongside humans. In Black Myth Wukong, the vast majority of both NPCs and enemies that the Destined One encounters are Yao Guais, with more powerful Yao Guais being called Yao Guai chiefs and the most powerful called Yao Guai kings, or queens if they're a female. But back to the Bull Guard. This Guai's story is extremely simple, in that he's a large, powerful, and incredibly loyal follower of the Black Wind King, who stationed the Bull Guard as the gatekeeper of the mountain. Basically the ultimate bouncer. It is said that even though he religiously stood guard day after day for more than a century, he never once tried to climb the ranks of the king's forces or do pretty much anything besides stand guard for the king. His payment was in the form of pills, which the king would feed to his wolf Guai forces as payment for their service. These pills were believed to make the wolves stronger, and the Bull Guard took their consumption so seriously and devoutly that he literally made a shrine for said pills, and would bathe his body and offer incense to the universe before eating them. Eventually, some of the other Guais in the king's forces began asking the Bull Guard how it is that he became so big and powerful and full of vigor, especially since his job as the ultimate bouncer entailed more or less standing in one place. The Bull Guard responded by saying it was only the king's pills that made him the way he is, and they too could be as big and burly and strong as he is if only they would keep up with eating their own pills. The other Guais didn't buy that though, and claimed that they had been keeping up with their own pills and they were still not super strong, implying the Bull Guard's pills were clearly better than theirs. Bull Guard was astonished at the notion of the king choosing favorites and said there's no way there would be a difference in pill power. So then the Guais decided to exchange pills with him to test it out, and wouldn't you know it, nothing changed. The Bull Guard was still huge and robust after consuming their pills, and the other Guais were still not after consuming the Bull Guard's. The ending to his story is left ambiguous, but in my opinion, this means that the Bull Guard was just a naturally bigger Guai than the others, and the effects of the pills were really just placebo, although the revelation of the pills being essentially fake didn't do much of anything to sway the Bull Guard's undying devotion, who continues to stand guard until the Destined One kills them in-game. There are two other unrelated bosses in Chapter 1, one being the first of the Killer Frog Company known as Ba Ligolang, and the first of the Angry Dragon Company known as the Red Long. But both of these are actually related to their own much bigger frog and dragon stories and have very little, if anything, to do with the other bosses of Chapter 1, so I'll be covering them separately in an upcoming video. You may want to make sure you're subscribed to stick around for when that happens. Moving on with the lesser bosses out of the way, it's time to talk about the main cast, starting with the top, the Black Wind King himself, who first appears to the Destined One near the summit of the Black Wind Mountain in humanoid form as a pretty jacked dude wielding a black tassel spear, but in reality is actually an enormous black bear demon, or more accurately, the very powerful Black Bear Guai, a Yao Guai king. Much of his backstory comes from the Journey to the West novel, where he's first introduced as a Yao Guai that lives on Blackwind Mountain. He has struggled with greed in his personal life, but was actually decently interested in Buddhism, and would visit the nearby Guanyin monastery from time to time, even going so far as to befriend and teach a young boy who eventually became known as the Jinchi Elder of the Guanyin monastery. The Black Bear would teach the Jinchi Elder certain magics that enabled the Elder to live a very long life. 270 years of life, in fact. This Elder shared the bear's greedy nature, which in my opinion might even be why they got along so well. Game knows game, after all. The Black Bear's path crossed Sun Wukong's in the novel when the Guanyin monastery was burned down by the hands of the very same Elder Jinchi, his friend, who is actually another boss in the game who the Destined One can encounter by traveling to the projected ancient Guanyin temple. In case you didn't know, the actual Journey to the West detailed in the book Journey to the West involves a group of pilgrims, led by the monk known as Tang Sanzang, who is escorted by three powerful individuals: the Monkey King Sun Wukong, the Pig Man Zhu Bazie, who, fun fact, Ganon from the Legend of Zelda series was based off of, and Sha Wujing, who a lot of people tend to forget about. The party happened upon the Guanyin Monastery at some point in their travels, where they met the elder Jinchi and were greeted and allowed to sit down for a meal. As the evening progressed, the elder, who again liked material treasures, eventually asked Tang if he had any grand treasures to show off. Even though Tang politely declined showing off anything, Wukong decided to show off Tan Cangzang's extravagant Buddhist robes, called a cassock, or more specifically, the Kasaya of Eversparks. And this inadvertently led to the elder becoming consumed with greed and wanting them. So consumed, in fact, that the elder Jinchi ended up plotting with some of his underlings to burn down the building that Wukong and his party would be sleeping in, which I'll explain more of later on in the video. Fortunately for Master Sanzang though, the Monkey King found out about this and prevented their room from burning down just in the nick of time, but in doing so caused the rest of the entire temple to burn down instead. While all this commotion was happening, the Black Bear Guai had approached the temple to actually help the monks out, specifically including his friend the Elder. But being a greedy individual himself, he then saw the Kasaya and he wanted it for himself. So he ended up just stealing it and running away, assuming that the Elder Jinchi would be safe, and leaving the temple and its monks in flames. After which the Black Bear organized a banquet to celebrate his obtaining the Kasaya, which apparently was a really cool Kasaya. The Elder Jinchi then came back to his senses and, after realizing what he had done, ended up committing suicide, especially since Tang's party was still alive. Wanting his Kasaya of Eversparks back though, Tang then made Wukong set off to retrieve it, since it was really Wukong's idea that made the elder jealous in the first place. Wukong then set off and spoke with Guanyin, who is another very powerful and influential mythological/religious individual, as well as what's known as a bodhisattva, or in other words, an individual who is enlightened to the point of reaching nirvana and becoming a Buddha themselves, but delays doing so out of philanthropy, wanting to help their fellow humans. As a side note, Guanyin is also the one responsible for creating Wukong's headband and giving it to Tang Sanzang in order to control the monkey, which will tighten to the point of intolerable headaches when a certain mantra is recited, even being able to kill the monkey should he rebel enough. But anyway, Guanyin agrees to help Wukong in retrieving this Kasaya, which results in Wukong killing the Black Bear's remaining friends, the first of which is a white-clad scholar, which we'll get to a little bit later on, and a little while later, the second of which was an old wolf guai known as Ling Shusi, who was a wise old guai interested in researching the secrets of immortality, and who was also preparing magical pills for the king's banquet. Sun Wukong then turned into one of these pills while Guanyin disguised herself as the deceased Ling Shusi, offering this pill wink wink to the king, which, as a reminder in case you've forgotten the past seconds, is actually Wukong himself. After he is swallowed by the black bear, he then beats the literal crap out of the king insides until the black bear yields out of pain and hands back over the Kasaya, ending up swearing loyalty to Guanyin in the process, who then gives him a headache-inducing circlet very similar to the one she gave Wukong in order to force the bear into service, serving as the protector deity of the Black Wind Mountain ever since. He ended up being in service to Guanyin for an unknown amount of time following the events of the book, and according to the game lore, along the way learned a certain magical mantra that allowed for the resurrection of the dead by using other corpses, though it wasn't always successful, which we'll see in just a bit. After Wukong's trio retrieved the Kasaya successfully and headed off on their other adventures, the first person the king tried to resurrect using this new mantra was none other than old Ling Shusi himself, his old wolf guai friend who was killed by Wukong. Since Ling Shusi was the leader of the wolf pack in his life, the black bear hoped that he would once again lead them in his resurrection alongside him. The king used the corpses of apparently voluntary other wolf guais in order to bring Ling Shusi back, but after his resurrection, Ling Shusi ran away from him. According to in-game lore, Ling Shusi expressed his incredibly deep-set guilt over being resurrected using the corpses of other innocent wolf guais to the white-clad noble over a pot of tea, who is another boss that Destin 1 encounters in the game, which we'll talk about a little bit later. After a brief conversation regarding the morality of the king's plans and schemes, he then stands up, asks rhetorically how he could possibly bear to live like this on their blood, tells the noble to inform their master that he need not come to see Ling Shusi any longer, and then walks off into the woods, down a new path, where he ends up taking his own life by hanging, his corpse of which we can actually find in-game. We never know if the king found his old friend's body, but out of a fear that the wolf pack would fall apart entirely and leave without a leader, he then appointed another powerful powerful wolf guy who arrived from another land, who brought with him several other wolves. He even went so far as to name this new powerful grey wolf leader the second Lingshusi, who is the actual Lingshusi that the Destined One encounters and fights in the game. This new grey Lingshusi differed quite a bit from the original in that he didn't care too much about wisdom or pills or tea, and was much more of a brute who relied on strength and fear to incite loyalty, which didn't sit too well with the original wolf pack who followed the original Lingshusi. This almost led to a bloodbath between the old and new wolf packs, but was broken up before it got too bad by another individual known as the Fireblade Wolf, a wolf guy known as Guangxi, who is another boss we encounter in the game, after which the new Lingshusi resided in the temple, commanding the new wolf pack under the Black Wind King, while the old wolf pack vowed to never again set foot inside the temple walls. Guangxi the Fireblade was a member of this original wolf pack who were all loyal to the original Lingshusi, and in his youth, before he was even given the name Guangxi, always dreamed of being human. He would try to take human shape and play with the other human children in town, but they would always figure out that he wasn't human and was a wolf guy in disguise and chase him away. This made him really sad, and he asked the other older wolf guys why the humans would treat him like this, to which they replied by saying it's because he doesn't act human even though he may look it temporarily. Taking this to heart, the pup pleaded to his master Lingshusi I to help him out and grant him this wish, which prompted Lingshusi to agree out of compassion for the pup, and the two of them went to see the black bear, who then transformed the young guy into a human monk, sending him into human society to study under the bear's friend, the elder Jinchi. The pup monk didn't do super well at first, as he was not very accustomed to human interaction and would fall for every single trick the other monks played on him, being unfortunately full of heart, but a bit slow and gullible. This prompted his new master elder Jinchi to name him Guangxi, which means the Great Wisdom, hoping that it would mean the pup would grow up to be more clever and sharp-witted and therefore not quite as bullyable. Eventually though, this was successful, and Guangxi learned to read and write and all the other trendy monk things, and this led to him officially assimilating into the ranks of the other monks, where he existed all the way until one fateful day when a certain traveling pilgrim group stopped by composed of a wise human monk and a rowdy monkey. Once Guangxi witnessed his master Jinchi's desperate longing for the Kasaya of Eversparks, out of his devotion and deep-set gratitude for the elder, he began to speak with the elder, and upon being goaded by one other particular individual, which we'll speak about in just a bit, devised a plan among the three of them to steal the Kasaya involving fire. However, by the next day, not only would his plan fail, but the entire temple that he called home would instead be burned to the ground. The elder Jinchi would take his own life because of this failure. His beloved old master Lingshusi would then be killed by the monkey, and even the mighty black bear Guai himself would be defeated and surrender entirely to Guanyin. Seeing all this suffering, he took ownership and internalized all of it as his own failure trying to be human, and thus rid himself of the human appearance and monk robes once and for all. He then retreated in shame to the mountains, where he forged his new weapon inspired by the raging flames that consumed Guanyin Temple, calling it the Red Tides out of shame and becoming the Fireblade Wolf. Haunted by voices calling his name out to him coming from the woods, repenting with Elder Jinchi's teachings until the day he is confronted and defeated by the Destined One. He even asks the Destined One if he would lay down his weapon and meditate with him on the Buddha's mercy before engaging in combat to the death. And if you'll recall, I did mention that there was one other person involved with the temple fire though. This is another Yao Guai named Guangmo, a new character in the game, who is yet another boss we can encounter in Chapter 1. Guangmo was both similar to Guangxi in that he was a Yao Guai who became a temple monk under Elder Jinchi, who also received a name from the elder, but he was dissimilar in pretty much every other way. He was a Guai who didn't care about being human, but rather wanted to be a legendary Yao Guai master, whose legacy would be remembered for all ages, bringing glory to none other but himself. The Black Bear's other friend, the white-clad scholar, who is also referred to in-game as the White Snake Guai, saw old Lingshusi send Guangxi into the temple to become a monk, and took that as a sign of Lingshusi trying to cozy up to Elder Jinchi and therefore win favor with the Black Bear. Out of jealousy, he commanded one of his followers, a Snake Guai, to also go and train in the temple, with one purpose: never fall behind, especially not behind Guangxi. He would train under Elder Jinchi, who would then name him Guangmo, which means the Great Tactician. But even though he was more intelligent than the Fireblade Wolf, often surpassing the pup monk in knowledge and show of skill, Elder Jinchi always seemed to favor Guangxi more. Not that this affected Guangmo too much, who only really wanted to finish up this job here, earning favor at the temple so that he could return to making a name for himself elsewhere. On the fateful night that Tang Sanzang and Wukong visited the temple, Guangmo also witnessed Elder Jinchi covet the Kasaya of Eversparks, and upon hearing Guangxi speak with the Elder very candidly about it, began turning his wheels, and therefore fueled the flames of the murderous plot, thinking that this would make the Elder appreciate him more, which in turn did actually impress the Elder, who for the first time acknowledged Guang Mo's wit. However, after the monkey Sun Wukong successfully defended their bedroom chamber and the rest of the temple burned down instead, Guang Mo left the monks for good. He never really cared for them too much anyway, and remained in the woods with the other snake guais to this day, until being found and killed by the Destined One. And now that we've taken one heck of a detour, let's return to the story of the Black Bear. After all of this temple drama, and the drama regarding the new Lingshusi's rise to power that he appointed over the new wolf guais, in his frustration he then tried to use the mantra to resurrect his old pal, the Elder Jinchi himself. But this resurrection was unsuccessful, and resulted in the stitched together corpses fusing with much of the gold and silver that Elder Jinchi had buried secretly in his life out of a greedy notion of keeping it all hidden, forming the big-headed crazed golem we see and kill in-game. As a side note, it also appears that the Wandering White, which we have no other information on in-game, is also some sort of spiritual echo of the Golden Elder Jinchi golem, since it not only looks and moves and sounds the exact same, but will legitimately disappear entirely if the Elder Jinchi golem is defeated before the White is, completely removing it from the game. The Black Bear Guai's efforts were not all in vain though, as he did end up repairing the temple at some point, and even going so far as to restore all of the ancient Guanyin texts, proving once again that even though he was greedy and didn't really know what he was doing sometimes, he was interested in Buddhism. He stayed here, assumedly performing his duties as protector deity of Blackwind Mountain, and possibly building an army and scheming for other unknown reasons all the way up until Wukong's death, after which he happened upon a shard of Wukong's essence, the Craving Eyes relic. When the Destined One finally meets up with him in-game, he immediately recognizes him as having something to do with Sun Wukong, but then tries to stop the monkey from obtaining the relic. But upon being defeated a second time on top of the summit, after even taking on his true Black Bear Yao Guai form, he pleads with the Destined One, who he refers to as the Young Sage as opposed to the Great Sage, which is the name that Wukong gave himself, begging for the monkey to spare his life. He claims that the Celestial Court were the ones who put him up to this, insinuating that he had no choice and was well aware of the fact that he would be mad to challenge the Sun Wukong, who is clearly powerful enough to have wrecked the entire Celestial Palace alone. He also claims that he had no idea how to even use the relic's power and simply placed it on top of a tower to trick the lesser Yao Guais into giving him offerings, like the greedy Guai he is. The little old dude known as the Keeper of Blackwind Mountain, who has been helping the Destined One along this whole time in Chapter 1, actually confirms the Black Bear's words. Then the bear grovels a bit more, pleading to be allowed to live, promising to run away back to the temple and put his headband back on, which is heavily implied to have been removed from his head out of a service that he performed for somebody in the Celestial Court in order to take down Sun Wukong. But that deals with a lot of the other bosses, such as Erlang Shan, and we'll be getting to that much later in another video. Anyway, the Keeper shuts his groveling up and urges the Destined One to claim his destiny and retrieve the first of the relics, after which the Black Bear isn't seen again in the game, except for in flashback cutscenes. Now I'm sure you'll remember, there's one boss in Chapter 1 that we missed, the White-Clad Noble. I'll be honest with you, after trying extensively to research the lore behind this particular individual, I'm unfortunately unable to come up with a rock-solid answer as to where he comes from or who specifically his brother is that apparently put him up to the task of fighting against the Destined One, but I do think we have a pretty good idea that's more or less confirmed, since he's in the domain of the Black Wind King and was affiliated with the resurrected old Lingshusi, who claims that neither of them should be there, and is also a White Serpent Guai, which just so happens to be the exact wordage that the game uses to refer to the Black Wind King's old friend, the other white-clad Scholar Serpent Guai. It's possible that he is the very same resurrected white-clad scholar who does appear in the novel that was friends with the Black Bear before being killed by Sun Wukong many years ago. I mean, he does love reading poetry and quoting it literally all the time, which is pretty scholarly in my opinion, and it would make sense given the fact that the Black Bear resurrected pretty much all of his other friends from the past, but I digress. If you know of lore contradicting or adding to anything I said in this video, by the way, please let me know in the comments below. That being said, that officially wraps up all of the lore behind every single boss in Chapter 1. If you're still watching, thank you so much. Please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't already for all of the other boss explanations coming very soon. And hint hint, if you're a Zelda fan, you might want to subscribe as well, since there's a new game coming later this month, which means new lore videos. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, who are the entire reason I make these videos in the first place, and that's about all she wrote. Be sure to follow me for much more and giveaways on my socials, and I'll see you next time. This is Bandit, signing out. Peace!